High drama erupting in Parliament this week as the Ad Hoc Committee investigating allegations of criminal infiltration and political interference within the country's justice system reached a critical juncture. The proceedings have transformed into a high-stakes battleground for the truth, with the very foundation of the police force under intense scrutiny following a sensational walkout by forensic investigator Sullivan during his testimony on Thursday. Another central figure in this week's hearings was the Northwest-based alleged political influence-peddler Brown Mogotsi, whose testimony provided a chilling look into the alleged systemic corruption plaguing the SAPS. Mahudzi, who has claimed to be a crime intelligence agent, was grilled by committee members over his financial links to murder-accused Vusimuzi Matlala, attempted murder-accused Vusimuzi Matlala, admitting he benefited financially from Matlala while purportedly investigating him. Completing the triad of appearances this week was former acting commissioner of the police, Vusimuzi. Let's wade into those waters. I'm joined by UKZN criminologist, Professor Nimala Gopal, as well as political analyst Khanyi Makubane. Good afternoon to the both of you. Khanyi, before we get into this, talking about the walkout, because that was the main talking point.
Of course.
Even people who don't watch the
They certainly were interested in it.
They saw it. Prof, before we get into that, let me just play that excerpt, that moment when Sullivan was walking out of Parliament.
I have reached a point now, Chairman, where I have to go.
No, Chair, he's not going to leave. He's not going to leave. Out. He's not going to leave.
I'm here of my own free will, and I'm leaving of
Mr. O'Sullivan.
The question that I had for him is,
Mr. O'Sullivan.
he wanted, no, Chair,
Mr. O'Sullivan.
I told him. It's fine. Chair, it's fine. Chair, I think we've dealt with the question.
All right, so that's how the cookie crumbled. Khanyi, you get first take of this. He has given an explanation, by the way. He says it wasn't a walkout. He says the committee members, the chairperson, everyone knew that I had limited time, I had a flight to catch, and they knew that latest by 1:15 I should get going. And he says that moment when he got up was 1:15 and could not postpone any further. Your sense of how it all transpired? I see you rolling your eyes very dramatically.
All right, let me collect myself. I think that this reminds me of Shamila Batohi not too long ago.
Yes.
You know, she did the same thing when she was, is it at the Matlala Commission?
It was the...
It was the NTP or something.
Yes,
yeah.
The investigation into the Nkabinde inquiry into the suitability of the South Gauteng and Director of Public Prosecutions. Yes.
There we go. So when somebody is subpoenaed, you know, to come and appear before an ad hoc committee or a Nkabinde commission of inquiry, it's serious. You cannot have travel plans on such a day. So I think that it was quite ambitious of Paul to think he'd be done by 12, because then it means he only expected surface level questions that he could just answer quickly and then, you know, get over it and continue with his day. But what emerged is somebody that can't face his own truth. You know, because at the juncture that he actually got up and left, he claims that he had already said it 5 times, but I think it's just a crutch. He was fearful of facing, you know, a lot of the questions which were coming. And yes, politicians sometimes and MPs can be long-winded and ask unnecessary questions, but it was coming to a juncture where he would have to reveal, you know, beyond the surface level, you know, the information that he knows, being a former UK intelligence operative, being somebody that's been involved in political circles. The reason why he's at Ad Hoc, because of the intelligence claims that he has filed in his affidavits and mass corruption and oversight in intelligence. And those are things he has to answer for. So my question is on why did he think he'd be able to be done by 1:15? I think he's a coward.
Well, he says, by the way, yeah, if I could reach, I'll reach and find, and find the message because we tried to reach him and he gave an account. He says he had actually offered a longer time, but then, you know, it wasn't taken up and therefore he changed his day. But anyway.
So he's saying he did offer himself.
Apparently.
And when the offer wasn't taken, he then made travel plans.
Yeah,
I think,
Yeah. Professor Gopal, come in here. Your overall sense of how that transpired. This is someone that many people want to hear from, right? Much has been said about Paul Sullivan in testimonies of other people, and therefore many questions hang about that people would have wanted to have answered. He was returning. It wasn't the first appearance. It was the second time. But, you know, it all appeared to be ill-tempered on both sides, and he ended up walking out.
Yes, so first of all, good afternoon to Lasizwe and to Kanye. Yeah, I think, you know, you say it was dramatic, and I think absolutely it was dramatic, the walkout. There was, for me, first of all, there were power relations at multiple levels that were occurring at the same time. But I think very importantly, you know, the fact that he did inform the commission, and, you know, if the commission had spoken to the evidence leader, I think in advance, they could have judged the amount of time that he would need. And as he has already provided from what Kanye or you have mentioned now, that he was prepared to give them additional time, etc. So I think, yes, he was an extremely important witness, especially since the allegations against him are extremely serious. But I really think, and I've said this previously, that the parliamentarians have lost important time because, like Kanye mentioned, instead of asking those low-level questions, they should have got into the meat of exactly what it is that they want to establish and his role as an intelligence spy, etc. And I think, unfortunately, parliamentarians should have also been briefed at this point in time, and they could have got legal opinion themselves so that they could have asked the most critical questions, and each one could have done that independently. And I think we would have probably had a far greater outcome than what we've seen on during his testimony.
Prof, let me stick with you. How important is it that the Parliament handles this question properly, given that already now we are in the realm where questions are being asked whether it violates the Powers and Privileges Act and whether that attracts criminal sanction? A case has already been laid by the EFF, but also, I suppose, for the kind of precedent that how this matter is handled, the precedent it will set for other people appearing before Parliament and deciding, I've seen enough, I'm out.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the public image and, you know, being that, given the fact that it was parliamentary space, I think it's going to be very critical and vital that the sanction is going to be appropriate, because you really don't want to give the impression that anybody who believes they're above particular spaces or rules or parliamentary rules, etc., can storm out if and whenever they would like to. So I think it has to be handled sensitively, and I think that's what the members in the committee have also identified. But of course, the appropriate sanction will absolutely have to be meted so that we don't, I think, maintain and retain the reputation and integrity of parliamentary. It's not really a proceeding, but I think the commission, or perhaps it is a proceeding in some way. So I think maintaining the integrity of these proceedings is really critical.
All right, Kanye, I'll give you final take then on Paul O'Sullivan. Before I do that, in fairness, let me read out the message that he did send us for a different show here at the SABC. He says, and I quote here, "I did not walk out of Parliament. They invited me for 2 hours from 10 a.m. through 12 p.m. I suggested we make it 3 hours to be on the safe side, as I would then leave at 1 o'clock to catch the 3:15 flight back to Johannesburg. The chairman repeatedly informed members I would have to leave at 1 o'clock. He informed them again at 12:30 that I only had 30 minutes left At 1 o'clock, I was still there. I made it clear that I must leave no later than 1:15. I then left at 1:15, which was 15 minutes later than planned. I then got stuck in traffic on the freeway and missed my 3:15 flight as I was bumped off for not arriving in time. So that's a portion of what he had to say. The overall take then of the question of legitimacy, Kanye, of this process, but also the question, the hard questions that are being asked of MPs themselves. I've seen a few commentators daring to rise up and say, I hold no brief for Mr. Sullivan, but the hostility has been quite palpable towards him and the questions that have been asked towards him.
I think that, first of all, what has happened is calling a number of things into review. Number one, the succinct nature of the questions has to be improved. You know, parliamentarians sometimes tend to be long-winded and, you know, simply assume that guests have the entire day to spend with them. And as we can see in this case, you know, it's not the case. But secondly, I think for Paul, as much as his reasons make sense, I mean, what you've just read out makes perfect sense. I can't fault it on anything, but perhaps it may have been wiser for him to change his travel arrangements, given the fact that he has seen how most you know, sessions transpire. You know, he knows how it goes and that it can be long. But I think, as the Prof has said, that there's a lot which needs to be done to tighten the systems themselves, particularly the chairperson who's running, you know, the ad hoc committee. He needs to be stricter. He needs to control his MPs a little bit more in terms of strictness of time. That's from a credibility of the proceedings themselves. He also had, I think, responsibilities, Paul, to not allow things to get to this point. Because look at what's running in the media. Look at the visuals. Optically, this does not bode very well for him.
All right. Someone who was not in a hurry to catch a flight is the alleged political influence peddler, Brown Mogotsi from the Northwest. He also testified. Let's take a listen at the excerpt where he's talking to the question of whether or not there are relationships between the minister who is on leave, Senzo Mchunu, remember him, and criminal syndicates. Take a listen to how he answered that question.
General Mkhwanazi came here and he told this committee that Minister Senzo Mchunu and whoever, and they said his members will come and brief the committee. He spoke about the big five, he spoke about so many things. Till today, there's no any link that speaks about Minister Senzo Mchunu, the big five, and the drug cartel. Now, I hope if General Mkhwanazi comes back, you may be able to place a similar question to him.
You've started investigating Matlala March, April 2024. From your investigations, what charges were pursued against Mr. Matlala, and what was the nature of the charges, if any? I mean, you were investigating him for almost 2 years. You even continued with your operations while he was in prison because you were receiving calls from him and you said you were talking to him.
Perhaps I should just say those matters are under investigation and I'm not at liberty to talk about them. But you will realize that it's very, very dangerous, Chairperson, to mention things that I'm not comfortable with. To tell you that there is a case number, I still don't give you the status of the case. I've never given you any status.
All right, Prof. Gopal, let me pick up with you on that particular aspect. Brown Mogotsi, issues of credibility, believability, as well as he asks a question there that says, General Mkhwanazi said his team would come forth and give evidence that would link Minister Senzo Mchunu to drug cartels, the Big Five and the likes, and says up to this day, none of that has happened. Just your overall sense of the value of the testimony of Brown Mogotsi, as well as the questions of credibility being asked about him.
Yes, I think in terms of the questions of credibility, I think those questions are very legitimate because I think his credibility is highly questionable. Also, his reliability, especially since he claims to be an informant. And if one looks at the characteristics of an informant, it absolutely goes above Brown Mogotsi's head, really. He doesn't fit a profile. So definitely credibility issues, I would say. And the fact that he says General Mkhonazi should have provided the evidence that might come. Perhaps it's still it's sensitive information at this point in time. I mean, the commission and the Ad Hoc Committee are not yet complete, so there's a possibility we will get that. However, I want to also say that I think through the evidence that we've already heard and seen, there might already be some threads that one could draw that could probably link the minister to some of these criminal activities, etc.
Say a bit more on that, Prof. And Kanye, sorry. I'll come to you in a moment because the Prof makes an interesting point. Give me a few examples.
So, for example, when he talks about, let's see, which one does it? He talks about, especially with Kat Matlala. I think, the fact that Kat has funded some activities in the ministry. Why would the Minister of Police have associations, for example, with Kat Matlala? And I think if we probe deeper and take all of the evidence, we have meta evidence at this point in time. And one would have to, like the commission is probably going to do, is take that meta evidence and then be able to analyze the data looking for particular themes. So I think that's still going to come, and I'm absolutely confident that the commission is going to provide that to us.
Yeah. Kanye, I won't lie to you. I battled to watch the evidence of Brown Mogotsi. I felt like I had seen everything I needed to see at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry, and I had a general sense. So I was always going to rely on reporting on it, the summaries. Right. I wasn't going to sit through the whole day. I won't even lie about that. But there's a question that he asks about whether or not a solid line can be drawn between Minister Mkhunu and criminal syndicates and drug cartels, or is it a dotted line, or does it matter at all? Does it become about political judgment at the end of the day?
Well, I'm not sure if we should call him Brown Mogotsi or Captain Brown Mogotsi at this stage, because clearly he has,
Special Agent
Mogotsi, because he has information and where levels of investigations are. But I think the most important thing is that the presence of a Brown Mogotsi in an ad hoc committee is indicative of the caliber of people that some of our politicians have been fraternizing with. And that is the biggest worry. I agree with the professor. He lacks credibility. He speaks as, somebody that in the streets we would call a hustler. Somebody who's just trying to make it in business, is excited by getting close to politicians, is more than happy to provide certain services because then it brings him access to opportunity, it brings him access to power as a business person, in exchange for favors and services. And for the mere fact that he says there's things that he cannot reveal and that there's cases that he cannot reveal, it also says that he knows there's high-powered politicians behind, some of the accusations and some of the key and central things that the commission are investigating. But what it also means is that we must question what is his incentive for what we saw as a type of protection for Senzo Mkhunu? Because he went out there and said Mkhwanazi came here and he made allegations, but to date his team has not yet provided the proof. But why is he then forcing us to reach a conclusion that means Senzo Mkhunu is not involved? When a Brown Mogotsi is protecting a Senzo Mkhunu, that for me is problematic, and it's actually a bigger red flag. Because as somebody called before the commission, your responsibility is to clear your name, first and foremost. So why is he what is the incentive for him for protecting Senzo Mkhunu? And I'm alluding, and I'm making allegations, but I'm trying to get us to think in a particular direction.
Incentive is the key and operative word. Thank you for that. That's political analyst Kanye Makubane. We were, of course, also joined by Professor Nirmala Gopal, who is a criminologist from the University of KZN. Thank you for your time this afternoon. And on the other side of the break, we will focus on the phased return of the South Africans who were in the fighting in Ukraine, right, on the side of Russia. Another group has come through, and we've also been hearing from the International Relations and Cooperation Minister that actually there could be more South Africans involved and that a number of South Africans have actually died coming out of that situation.